So when I'm working on a painting, there's always a couple of ideas or concepts that are kind of kicking around in the back of my head that usually find their way into the work. With the Somerville paintings, the two big ideas that I'm usually working with are this idea of beauty and this idea of the history of the city. And I tend to approach each of those in sort of a non-conventional way. So I'm a plein-air painter, and what that means is I bring my paint and my gear out into the city. I hop on my bike or I walk around and I find a spot to set up and paint. And there's this really historical or record-keeping aspect of that style of painting. You know, I'm painting a space in a time. That's just an interesting thought, in Somerville, which is changing so rapidly. But my starting point is always going to be, trying to find something beautiful. A lot of times that will be sort of formal compositional element. For example, in Somerville, the houses are all kind of stacked on top of each other. They create this really lovely, almost abstract pattern of like light shapes and shadow shapes that is really enjoyable to paint. Other areas, evoke sort of an emotional response. A couple of times I've painted this big, old, abandoned, burned out house. And like the first time I painted it, it was sort of this hulking form in the snow. But the second time I painted it, just a couple of days later, I approached it just about sunset, and there was this profound sense of kind of stillness and emptiness that was really, a little startling, a little unusual in Somerville. We're not used to seeing emptiness. The city is so big, it's always just trying to fill itself back up. And when I talk about history, I'm not really talking about, on a certain date George Washington slept here. I'm talking more about the elements of the city that have grown up organically and created this texture and this sort of layering that's really, really beautiful. There's this sort of history that has sprung up organically that creates this layering and this texturing. I've painted these corner markets, these little bodegas, and the auto body shops, and these industrial buildings. And I think there's this sort of important aspect to capture them as a record, no matter how small or how personal, because the city is changing so much that they are likely not going to be there in a few years, or at least not in their current iteration. Not to create too much of a ham-handed metaphor, but I think there's something kind of interesting about capturing the Peter Ford manufacturing company, which makes these little metal washers. It has all of the formal elements, but there's this kind of poignancy of catching it at sunset as the shadows are kind of coming up. But no matter what I'm painting, at the end of the day, it's really about capturing that element that is beautiful. And I think beauty is something that's kind of easy when you're looking at a vase of flowers or like a big scenic landscape, but when you're in a city like Somerville and it's very chaotic and dusty and noisy, you need to look a little bit deeper. But those elements are there, and for me, as a painter, sort of the most rewarding aspects are when I can see something beautiful and I can put it into the painting and use that to show the viewer something that they may have seen, a million times before, but show it to them the way that I see it. And that's what I do.